I still remember the exact moment everything I believed about my marriage turned to ash. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of evening where the sky goes purple before it goes dark, and the neighborhood smells like wood smoke and cut grass for the last time before winter settles in. I had come home early from a job site in Clarksville, a bathroom renovation I'd been managing for a client who wanted it done before the holidays. My crew had wrapped up ahead of schedule, and I thought, maybe I'll surprise Melissa. Maybe we'll cook dinner together for once. Maybe we'll actually sit at the table and talk like we used to. Instead, I found a receipt in the pocket of her coat. I wasn't snooping. I want to make that clear because it matters to me. Even now, her coat had fallen off the hook by the back door, and I picked it up. The receipt slipped out. A hotel receipt. The Grove Inn. Up on Route Neuf. Room 214. Dated 3 weeks before. On a Friday, she told me she was working late at the dental office where she managed patient billing. I set the receipt on the kitchen counter. I made myself a cup of coffee. I sat down at the table and looked at it for a long time. Melissa came home about 40 minutes later. I watched her face when she saw the receipt lying there. I watched her cycle through 6 different expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise. Recognition. Calculation. A brief flash of something, almost like relief. Then fear. And finally, a mask of calm that she wore like a woman who had been rehearsing for this moment longer than I knew. Danielle, she said. How long, I asked. She didn't insult me by pretending she didn't know what I meant. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. She folded her hands on the table. And she told me, 11 months. His name was Garrett. He worked in sales at a company that handled commercial printing. She had met him at a networking event her office attended the previous December. It had started as texts, then lunches, then the Grove Inn, then more hotels. Then, she told me, it had become something she didn't know how to stop. I asked her if she had tried. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. I sat there for a long time after she finished talking. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the street. I kept thinking about all the Fridays, all the late nights, all the times she'd seemed distracted or distant, and I had chalked it up to stress at work, or her mother's health problems, or just the natural tide of a long marriage going through a quiet phase. 11 months. 300 and some odd days. While I had been rewiring kitchens and refinishing hardwood floors and putting money away in a savings account for the vacation, we kept saying we'd take. She had been building a second life. 6 exits up the highway. I think you should leave. I told her. Tonight? Please. She left. She went to her sister Patrice's house, which was about 12 minutes away in the same suburb. I sat in our kitchen until nearly midnight. Then I went to bed. Because I didn't know what else to do. The next 2 weeks were a kind of controlled disintegration. I went to work. I came home. I ate whatever was in the refrigerator. I called my brother Kevin in Phoenix and told him what had happened. He offered to fly out. I told him not yet. Melissa called me several times. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. In the messages, she sounded sorry. She sounded scared. She said she missed me and that she'd made terrible choices and that she wanted to talk. I listened to every message twice and then saved them without responding. Then, about 11 days after she left, she called me and asked if we could meet for coffee. She had something important to tell me. We met at a place called the Blue Anchor Cafe, not far from the town center. I arrived first. I ordered tea because my stomach had been bad. She walked in wearing a gray wool sweater and sat down across from me with her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't ordered yet, because the waitress hadn't come yet, and she just needed something to hold on to. She told me she was pregnant. I don't have a poetic way to describe what that felt like. It felt like the floor dropping out from under a chair I was already barely sitting on. I looked at her. I looked past her at the window. A woman outside was walking a yellow Labrador. I watched the dog sniff a fire hydrant. I focused on that for a moment. "Is it mine?" I asked. She said she didn't know for certain, but based on the timing, she thought it was probably Garrett's. I nodded. I picked up my tea. I set it back down. "What does he say?" I asked. She said Garrett didn't want to be involved. He was married. She told me, as if that information was something she expected me to find useful. His wife didn't know. He had told Melissa that he couldn't leave his family and that he thought she should handle it, by which he apparently meant terminate the pregnancy. She had told him she wasn't going to do that. "Okay," I said. "Danielle, I need some time." I said, "I'll be in touch." I paid for the tea. I left. I gave myself a week. I called my attorney, a man named Phil Hartley who had handled the legal work when I'd incorporated my contracting business 5 years prior. I told him the situation. He was quiet for a moment, and then he walked me through what I needed to know. I made notes. I thanked him and told him I'd be back in touch. Then I got a call from Melissa's mother. Patricia Doyle was a woman I had known for 14 years. I had helped move her furniture when she downsized to a condo. I had driven her to physical therapy after her knee replacement. I had sat at her Thanksgiving table so many times. I knew the exact crack in the ceiling above the dining room light fixture. I had genuinely loved her. In the way you come to love someone who becomes part of the texture of your adult life. She told me she wanted to have a family conversation, that Melissa's father and her sister Patrice and Patrice's husband, Tom, would be there. She said the situation was complicated and that it would be best if we could all sit down together and figure out a way forward as a family. I should have known then what kind of conversation it was going to be. I went anyway, because I was still, at that point, operating under the assumption that people I had loved for over a decade would treat me with basic decency. We met on a Saturday afternoon at Patricia's condo. The dining table had been set with coffee and pastries, as if this were a planning meeting for a birthday party. Melissa sat next to her mother. Patrice sat across from me with Tom beside her. Her father, Gerald, sat at the head of the table with the expression of a man who has been asked to chair a board meeting he didn't call. Patricia did most of the talking. She said that what had happened between Melissa, and she paused here and didn't say his name, the other man, was deeply unfortunate. She said that Melissa was deeply sorry and that she had made terrible decisions. But she said that the situation was what it was now, and that there was a child coming, and that the most important thing was to think about what was best going forward. She said that she hoped I could find it in my heart to be mature about it. She said she hoped I could accept the situation and move on. Patrice nodded. Tom looked at his coffee. Gerald cleared his throat. I sat there and let the words settle. Mature. Accept it. Move on. I looked at Melissa. She was looking at her hands. "You want me to stay married to her?" I said, "and raise this child." Patricia said that marriages went through difficult periods, that many couples had come back from worse, that children needed stability, that if I truly loved Melissa, I would understand that people make mistakes and that forgiveness was the only path to healing. "And what does Melissa want?" I asked. Melissa looked up. "I want to keep my family together," she said, very quietly. "I want to fix this. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking you." I looked around the table. 4 people who had been at my wedding. 4 people who had come to my father's funeral. 4 people who were currently sitting in a circle, asking me to absorb the consequences of my wife's year-long affair with a married man and raise that man's child as my own. Because that would be the mature thing to do. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip. I set it down. "Thank you for having me," I said. "I'll be in touch." I drove home. I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and called Phil Hartley and told him to start the paperwork. What happened next took about 4 months to fully play out. And I want to be honest about the fact that none of it was easy or triumphant in the way that stories sometimes make things sound. There were nights I didn't sleep. There were mornings I sat in my truck in a parking lot for 30 minutes before I could make myself go into a job site. There were conversations with Kevin on the phone, late at night, where I didn't say much, and he mostly just stayed on the line with me. But I also made moves. The first move was the house. Melissa and I had purchased our home together 9 years earlier. But I had been the primary earner throughout our marriage and had made the majority of the mortgage payments. Phil walked me through the equity situation. I made sure I had documentation of what I'd contributed. I knew exactly where I stood. The second move was the finances. We had joint accounts. I did not clean them out. That's not the kind of person I am. And Phil advised against anything that could be characterized as retaliatory. But I separated my business accounts fully, made sure my payroll and receivables were insulated, and opened a new personal account. I moved my direct deposit. I documented everything. The third move was the most important one, and the one that took the most courage to execute. I called Garrett's wife. Her name was Linda. I found her through a combination of information Melissa had let slip over the months since the affair came out, and some careful searching that I won't detail here. I want to be clear. I did not call her to be cruel or to blow up her life for sport. I called her because she deserved to know, because she was making decisions about her own life, her own marriage, her own future, based on incomplete information. And because I knew, having been in that position, that not knowing is its own kind of violence. Linda answered on the third ring. I told her who I was. I told her what I knew. I told her that I was sorry to be calling, and that I understood if she needed to hang up, but that I thought she deserved to hear it from someone who wasn't going to protect himself at her expense. She didn't hang up. She was very quiet for a long time. Then she thanked me, and her voice was the controlled voice of someone who would cry later, when she was alone, and would deal with the shaking after she got off the phone. I told her I was sorry again. She said she was sorry too. I'm not sure entirely what she meant by that, but I understood it. The divorce proceedings began in February. Melissa, through her attorney, attempted several strategies that I had more or less anticipated. There was an attempt to characterize her pregnancy as a factor that warranted spousal support at a higher level. There was an argument about the house. There was, briefly, a suggestion from her attorney that I had been emotionally withholding during the marriage in ways that had contributed to her choices, a claim that Phil dispatched with the kind of polite thoroughness. That is why I paid him what I paid him. Gerald called me once during this period. He said he thought I was being too hard on his daughter. I told him, respectfully, that I disagreed, and that I thought the people at that table had made the mistake of confusing my patience for an absence of limits, and that I hoped they could understand the difference now. He didn't have much to say to that. We ended the call civilly, which I think is what we both wanted. Patrice sent me a long text at some point in March. It was a mixture of recrimination and what she seemed to think was perspective, something about how all marriages are complicated, and how Melissa had her reasons, and how I would understand someday. I read it. I typed a response and then deleted it. I didn't answer. The settlement came through in early May. I kept the house. Melissa received a fair share of the equity we'd built together, which Phil ensured was calculated correctly, and which I did not contest beyond what was reasonable. She moved into an apartment in a town about 25 minutes away. The child, a boy, was born in June. A paternity test confirmed what Melissa had suspected. Garrett was the father. Last I heard, Garrett and Linda had separated. Linda had retained an attorney. I don't have any satisfaction in that information. Exactly. But I'll admit I don't have grief over it, either. People ask me sometimes, mostly Kevin, mostly late at night, whether I regret how I handled it, whether I should have tried harder, whether the marriage could have been saved. I've thought about it more than I probably should have. I've turned it over in my mind during drives and during quiet job sites and during the long winter evenings in my house, which is mine now, which is quiet now, which sometimes feels very large for one person, and sometimes feels exactly the right size. Here's what I know. I didn't yell at Melissa. I didn't try to destroy her. I didn't go looking for ways to punish people who had hurt me. Except in the one case where I believe someone had a right to the truth. I paid my bills. I showed up to work. I called my brother when I needed to talk. I put one foot in front of the other for long enough that eventually the ground started to feel more solid underneath me. What I refused to do was absorb the consequences of other people's decisions and call it maturity. What I refused to do was sit at a table where a group of people who loved Melissa more than they loved fairness asked me to reshape my entire life around the wreckage she had made, and nod my head and say, of course. Of course. Whatever you need. Patricia had used the word mature. I've thought about that word a lot. I think maturity is sometimes the ability to sit still while people around you make demands. I think it is also, sometimes, the ability to stand up from the table and walk out the door and let the silence behind you say everything that words cannot. I think I was the most mature person in that condo on that Saturday afternoon. I just wasn't mature in the way they wanted me to be. It's been about 14 months now. The work has been good. I picked up 2 large contracts in the spring, a kitchen renovation in a historic house in the Westbrook neighborhood, and a commercial build-out for a restaurant group that found us through a referral. My crew is solid. We're busy through the end of the year. I started running in the mornings, which is not something I ever did before. I run about 3 miles most days, along a trail that goes through a patch of woods near the edge of town. In the fall, the leaves come down fast, and the trail gets covered, and you have to watch where you step. And I find I don't mind that. I find I like having to pay attention to where I'm going. Kevin finally came out to visit last month. We spent a weekend fixing the fence along the back of my property that I'd been meaning to get to for 2 years. We ate ribs from a place on Meridian Avenue and watched 3 consecutive evenings of baseball and argued about the designated hitter rule. It was the best weekend I'd had in longer than I could remember. "You doing okay?" he asked me. On the last night. Sitting on the back porch with cold bottles of beer. "Yeah," I said. "I think so. You seem different." "Different how?" He thought about it. "Quieter. But not sad quiet. More like settled quiet." I thought about that. I looked out at the yard. At the new fence sections catching the light from the back door. At the ordinary Saturday night dark beyond the property line. "I think that's about right." I said, "There are things I lost that I'll carry. 14 years is a long time. And you don't walk away from something like that without leaving pieces of yourself behind. I know that. I'm not pretending otherwise. But I also know what it felt like to drive home from Patricia's condo that afternoon and sit in my own driveway and feel, underneath all the grief and disbelief and exhaustion, the small, hard certainty that I was not going to do what they asked me to do. That I was going to handle this my own way. On my own terms. With my own dignity intact. That feeling didn't disappear. It's still there. Quiet and steady. The same as it was the day I felt it for the first time. Some things, once you find them, you keep.